2023 was a garbage year in video gaming. Actually, 2023 was one of the best years we've had in gaming for a long time. So many amazing games were released this year with tons of surprise hits as well. Even with how good of a year 2023 was, there were still some absolute stinkers this year, and I want to talk about my top 10 most disappointing games of 2023. But before we begin, let's talk about the couple rules I have for this list. Rules 1 and 2, no kids games and no shovelware. These kinds of games are obviously not going to be any good, so there's no point in including them on the list. And the last rule, all the games on this list were either released or exited early access in 2023. With that out of the way, onto the list! Number 10. While Overwatch 2 was technically shit out onto our plates in 2022, the game exited early access in August of 2023, so it's eligible for this list. Now you'd think that a game that's exited early access would be finished and good now, right? Nope, Overwatch 2 is still a soulless, glorified Overwatch update that does not have enough to distinguish itself from the game it replaced. It still has terrible monetization, with new heroes locked behind their battle passes. And then in 2023, they managed to shit the bed even more. Activision Blizzard announced that they were scrapping their anticipated PvE hero mode. The PvE game mode seemed like a much-needed breath of fresh air with dedicated story-based missions that would not only be a ton of fun, but also provide tons of lore and insight into the Overwatch world. That, combined with a in-depth progression system, the PvE mode seemed poised to finally bring Overwatch back into people's good graces. And then Activision announced that they were scrapping the dedicated PvE mode to focus on seasonal content, dropping occasional event PvE missions and live service features to incentivize holiday/event cosmetic monetization, which just pissed everyone off. Then they announced that Overwatch 2 was exiting its early access period and dropped the first few PvE missions. And the missions cost $15 to play, cannot be played solo or offline, and have such underwhelming gameplay and story that it's not engaging enough to motivate you to continue playing. They also scrapped the hero mode and broke their promise of having branching hero skill trees, creating what was ultimately a very mediocre experience. Safe to say that 2023 provided the final nail in the coffin for Overwatch 2. Number 9. While this game was ultimately disappointing to me, I'll be honest and say I'm not super surprised it ended up on this list. When I saw Avatar being advertised, it just looked like Far Cry but with blue people. And I was right! This is just Far Cry but on Pandora. At this point, Ubisoft makes like 3 games: Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and Just Dance. They're a content recycling machine, and Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora fits right into that. There were so many times when I was playing this game that it felt like I had played it before. And to a degree, I was right. It's very derivative of Far Cry Primal, which was already derivative of and heavily reused Far Cry 4. Through Avatar, you collect materials and use a bow to clear out enemy outposts just like Far Cry Primal. The only thing I can give credit to this game is that it is gorgeous. All it has going for it is its looks. Beyond a shiny outer coating, it's just bland, repetitive, and derivative. Just like the movie. Number 8. Atomic Heart is the first real disappointment on this list for me. While the Overwatch 2 stuff kind of bummed me out, I was already mostly out of the door for Overwatch to begin with. Atomic Heart, on the other hand, seemed really interesting when I first learned about the game. This game seemed to come out of nowhere. I kept seeing cosplays for the game all over my timeline, and when I looked into it, the concept really intrigued me. The alternative history setting of a successful and technologically advanced Soviet Union in the 1950s was definitely an interesting backdrop. Unfortunately, the game fell short of its promising premise and ended up being a pretty mediocre shooter filled with uninspired combat and an underwhelming progression system that failed to set it apart from other games in the genre. Most of the bosses aren't anything to write home about and are honestly kind of forgettable. Like, the only boss I can think of off the top of my head are the twins. The issue is the interesting setting doesn't do enough lifting to excuse how by the numbers the protagonist is. P3 is your standard short-haired, bearded soldier protagonist filled with cliche quips and enough curses to fill a warehouse of jars. And if P3's action hero cursing and quips weren't bad enough, you also have to deal with a talking companion character named Charles. The banter between P3 and fucking Charlie D'Amelio is so ham-fisted and out of place that it's incredibly jarring. And when you get over how jarring the random inclusion of modern turns of phrase are in a supposedly 1950s setting, the dialogue is also just bad. Initially, the narrative actually seems kind of interesting and mysterious, but it gets really tiring really quickly when every character P3 interacts with is manipulating him in some way while keeping information away from him, but at the same time wanting him to fulfill their goals. This creates confusing and vague dialogue that sends you in circles to the point where you just stop caring about any side of this conspiracy that the video game desperately wants you to find interesting. In the end, this game just falls dramatically short of the games it's clearly inspired by. Like, just go play BioShock. Number 7. This one hurt. I love Payday 2. I spent an unhealthy amount of time in high school robbing banks and stores with my friends rather than doing any kind of schoolwork, so when Payday 3 was coming out, I was hyped. And then the game launched. And boy, did it launch.
Oh, no.
The launch of Payday 3 was so rough that it was genuinely impressive. They made the always excellent decision of putting in an always online requirement, even when playing solo, which we all know always works out so well. And unsurprisingly, the servers shit themselves and couldn't handle all the people trying to play their game. The game spat out errors like candy, and it got so bad that the devs had to openly apologize and grind to fix the issues as soon as possible. When the online issues were finally fixed and I was able to play it, another glaring issue came to the forefront of my Payday experience. Payday 3 isn't very good. The game suffered all around, the gameplay wasn't that great, and comparing it to Payday 2, Payday 3 felt like a downgrade. Numerous quality of life improvements that were implemented in the years of support for Payday 2 were noticeably missing, and the game is seriously lacking in content. And what content there is in Payday 3 is just not as good as Payday 2. It says a lot when the majority of your player base drop your game to go back and play the previous entry. The best thing I can say about Payday 3 is that it made me appreciate Payday 2 a whole lot more. Number 6. Now this game, is it a game? I mean, you have to pay money to interact with it, and it's Silent Hill, so yeah, I'd say it's a game. Either way, this game easily earns my biggest, what the fuck even is this award for 2023. I don't know, it really doesn't seem like Konami wants to make video games anymore. It is just kind of pissing and shitting out whatever they want with beloved IPs. Like, they fire Kojima, and then they release a zombie survival Metal Gear Solid game where you have to pay for save slots. And then they cancel one of the most hotly anticipated video game horror releases with Silent Hills off the back of the amazing PT, only to release an interactive streaming game thing? I don't know what to call it. I don't know what the fuck this is. It's an interactive streaming television show, but you have to basically buy a fucking battle pass where you can unlock stickers to slap on the streams and cosmetics for your chat avatar. Yeah, don't get me started on the chat. There was a chat, at least for a little while, then it got removed because people realized that the moderation was lacking. Like, why did this happen? Who thought a streaming TV show game thing with a battle pass was a good idea? How the hell does Konami still have their hands on amazing IPs only to do the stupidest shit with them? Number 5. Let me get this out of the way. I'm not going to delve into the politics of this release or the Harry Potter series in general. That being said, as a Harry Potter fan myself, this game was mid as shit. While you have some people embodying the sunk cost fallacy to a T and acting as if this was the greatest game of the year and was robbed, let me tell it straight. Those people are either coping to the highest degree or are seriously blinded by Harry Potter fandom and nostalgia. The initial shine of this game is quite good. The aesthetics are on point, the music is very Harry Potter-y, and Hogwarts as a castle is rendered amazingly. Too bad I had little desire to explore it. At its core, Hogwarts Legacy is a very middle-of-the-road action RPG with a simplistic progression system, an unengaging story, a lack of interesting or compelling characters, and mildly serviceable gameplay. The story is easily one of the weakest aspects of this video game. The whole time it felt like I was playing a self-insert Harry Potter fanfiction that was trying real hard to have a mystery element that you can see coming from a mile away. While spell combat is fun, it's bogged down by flaccid gameplay. None of the quests in the game are interesting, and I felt no desire to go around the world and explore and collect the ungodly amount of collectibles this game has to offer. I did like 2 Merlin trials and then never bothered with them. The Hogwarts school aspect was a real letdown for me. The class portion of the game is hardly there outside of a few cutscenes, and then you go do some inane task for a professor, and bam, I'm suddenly an amazing student. Now, I might be the only person in the world that would be interested in this, but I think what would be really cool is a Hogwarts game in the style of the Persona games. I think the whole going to class and juggling social links gameplay in Persona would fit amazingly in a Hogwarts setting. Regardless of what some people might say, I found myself getting very bored of Hogwarts Legacy pretty often. It took me like 7 months to finally beat this game because I would keep dropping it to play other better games. At the end of the day, Hogwarts Legacy just isn't anything special. Number 4. Alright, it was only a matter of time before we talked about this game. The turd that Arcane dropped on our plates was such a disappointment because I know Arcane can do better. They've made some of the most inventive single-player video games in recent memory. Dishonored and Deathloop are amazing games, so this should have been a slam dunk, right? Well, instead, Arcane fell flat on their faces and reiterated to the world that just because you can make a fantastic single-player experience doesn't mean it'll translate well to multiplayer. Redfall is just bad. Not only did it release with a slew of technical issues, but initially, it couldn't even crack 60 FPS. It had optimization issues out the wazoo, and want to play the co-op game offline like Borderlands? Well, too bad. It's got an always online requirement. Even when you get past the technical issues, the core game is hardly an improvement. Turns out that Redfall is a boring by-the-numbers looter shooter with comically bad AI, shallow gameplay, and it even fucked up the looter shooter aspect as it has a tiny pool of weapons to choose from. They couldn't even get that part right. The story of Redfall is a non-starter. Like, I can't for the life of me tell you anything about the story beyond vampires. None of the characters are interesting, engaging, or even likable. There's nothing redeeming or fun about this game. The only fun that you can glean from this game is getting some friends together and goofing around. But be careful, progress is only tied to the host. And while they've spent the year trying to make improvements to the game, polishing a turd still leaves you with a turd. Number 3. Oh boy, this game, huh? I remember when I first saw ads for this game. It actually seemed like an interesting concept, and I even applied to get a key for it. But if there's anything that this list has proven, an interesting concept can only go so far. Playing a stealth-focused video game as one of the most recognizable Lord of the Rings characters could have been great, especially since stealth games haven't seen a good release in a little while. Unfortunately, we got Lord of the Rings Gollum instead, and let's just say I'm glad I didn't pay for this game. Lord of the Rings Gollum is one of the buggiest games to release in a year that had a new Bethesda game with graphics and textures that would look bad for a PS2 game, let alone a current-gen game in 2023. Everything about this game is rough. The gameplay is bare bones with a heavy focus on pushing up to climb with no real depth to the traversal. The platforming is abysmal, with every leap to another platform or edge being a leap of faith because half the time Gollum just won't platform properly and you'll fall to your death. The stealth in this stealth game barely functions as you get spotted easily. Lord of the Rings Gollum is one of the most disappointing games of 2023 because there is so much potential in a Lord of the Rings stealth game, but Daedalic Entertainment dropped the ball, overworked their staff, and bungled a beloved IP by excreting this travesty on our plates. Number 2. It's kind of weird to put this game so high on a disappointing list, considering it holds the second place on my top 20 favorite games of all time list. But the PC port of The Last of Us is one of the biggest slaps in the face I received in 2023. The Last of Us is an amazing video game with some of the best writing and characters in all of fiction, and the idea of it finally being released on PC is exciting. 2023 was already poised to be an amazing year for the series, considering how good the TV show was. Just thinking about the modding potential had me so excited. And after you spend 2 hours compiling shaders, you're greeted with one of the buggiest gaming experiences of the year. Somehow, the PC port introduced brand new technical issues not found in any other version of the game. The port is so poorly optimized that it can barely hold a frame rate and maintain the stability of the shaders it just spent an eternity compiling. So many people installed this game, booted it up, and started playing, only to be met with an agonizing "please wait" message that would stall progress as the shaders weren't even done compiling. And even after all that is said and done, the textures were so often broken and would flicker. Sometimes the textures would break so badly that they went neon and it looked like a rave was happening. Nope, just the game shitting the bed. And the models. The character models came with very unique issues, to say the least. So often, the hair and facial features of the characters just broke, and it looked genuinely hilarious. All these technical issues were astonishing to behold. It's amazing how badly done this PC port was. Like, there's a part of me that's more impressed than anything else. The thing that makes it frustrating is that when the game isn't shitting itself, it genuinely looks amazing. The fidelity of the PC port on the higher end settings is amazing, and there are so many fine details such as reactive water that it's a shame that if you try to run it at these higher settings, it crashes almost regularly. A friend of mine streamed his experience with The Last of Us on PC, and it was his first time playing the series. Imagine hearing about how amazing The Last of Us is for the last 10 years, hearing it's finally going to release on PC, so you buy it, and this is what you're greeted with? I'd be confused, disappointed, and enraged. It took like 8 patches within the first month of release for the game to achieve a playable state, but at that point, the damage had already been done. Number 1. No game that released this year has made me more glad that I have Game Pass than Starfield. I was already approaching this game with caution and skepticism after the train wreck that was Fallout 76, and even then, Starfield disappointed. I don't know, it's weird. While games like Fallout 76 were fantastically poorly made and almost comically broken, Starfield just ended up being boring. Starfield is the game that broke the camel's back regarding Bethesda games. Their game development style is painfully outdated, and it's become apparent with Starfield. Nothing about this game was engaging or interesting. The gameplay loop is basic and hollow, with moronic AI bullet sponges and by-the-numbers combat. The story was so uninteresting, I can barely remember the plot. And the side quests, you know, the thing that makes Bethesda games fun? Yeah, there's not a single interesting side quest. The world was bland and none of the characters are interesting. Like, characters used to be one of the draws of Bethesda games. Fallout 3 and 4 had tons of personality, and even Skyrim had a sense of adventure and wonder to its world. Starfield, on the other hand, is one of the first Bethesda games where I felt no desire to walk off the beaten path, and I just hammered through the main plot line. I had no desire to explore any of the worlds, as none of them were particularly interesting. Also, world traversal doesn't encourage exploration at all, since everything is reduced to menus and fast travel. Like, it takes ages to get anywhere. You have to trudge over to your ship, sit through a loading screen, go to the cockpit, select a planet to travel to, sit through another loading screen, appear nearby the planet, select your landing zone, sit through another loading screen, and then you're finally at your destination. This doesn't really lend itself well to exploration. The few times I tried to explore the many different planets in the galaxy, I was met with bland, procedurally generated outposts and caves that had nothing of interest or value in them. The grand scope of the game only serves to undermine the experience. Rather than focusing on maybe a handful of interesting and well mapped out planets that you can more freely traverse, they went far too big and created a bunch of empty planets with nothing of interest. Whenever I was playing Starfield, I was just reminded of better games that do the whole space adventure thing way better, like Mass Effect, and other better Bethesda games of time past, like Fallout 3 or Oblivion. While Todd Howard is desperate to hype this game up and claim that it's designed to be played for a long time, I could barely manage 40 hours, and every second that I played Starfield, I felt like I'd just rather be playing Fallout 3 or Skyrim again. All Starfield does is make me worried about Elder Scrolls 6. Starfield had a universe of hype behind it, and just like Todd Howard at the Game Awards, I'm left extremely disappointed.